Greetings. This is really a great, distinguished group of people. Honored to have you. Look forward to this conversation today. Beautiful venue. I want to thank the port for making this available to us, and it's kind of a perfect day, actually. It's not too hot, kind of cool, draft coming through. I don't have to squint, so I'm happy about that. I want to welcome you all to what we're calling a conversation about the Cascadia Innovation Corridor project. Today, we'll be hearing from a number of people, including former Governor Christine Gregoire. Unfortunately, she's not with us today. She's going to appear electronically. She had a close exposure with COVID, and she's being safe. But we look forward to hearing her talk about the Cascadia Innovation Corridor. And then we'll have a conversation about our involvement locally in the subregion in and around Bellingham and our relationship to it. The origins of today's conversation grew out of a conversation that I had about 8 or 9 months ago with former Mayor Tim Douglas. And he had shared with me his awareness of, that I was aware of too, but did not participate in it directly, about a conference that occurred, in fact, 1 year ago today. The second day of the conference was September 13th, 2022. It was the 6th annual Cascadia Innovation Corridor Conference. It was held up at Semiahmoo, and it was hosted by former Governor Christine Gregoire. And of course, Tim and I had a conversation and talked about how we have an important role, a prominent role in that process, being situated as we are between Vancouver and Seattle. So that was the basis of all of this. Bellingham, of course, as I said, situated as it is, uniquely, in an important place. And we're Bellingham. We're a very, very popular place. We're on all sorts of top 10 lists. It's a reality that we are going to continue to grow. Our region has important institutions of higher learning, Western Washington University, Whatcom Community College, Bellingham Technical College, the Northwest Indian College. We're going to continue to grow and have to figure out how we transport people, how we house people, what kind of infrastructure that we need. And so today is very much about planning for responsibly and coordinating for that future. The work we do, of course, is in service to the future that we need. Our duty is to harness these energies in the most inspired way. The ambition is to become the world's first sustainable mega region. The world has 43 identified mega regions, and the area known as Cascadia is one of them. And so today we're having a conversation about that, bringing greater awareness to all of you in our neck of the woods. And we look forward to your participation and your collaboration. I do want to give a shout out to our sponsors. I mentioned the Port of Bellingham. I called Rob Fixup several weeks ago. Where's Rob? Somewhere in here. And hi, Rob. He enthusiastically agreed to be a participant in this effort, and he made this space available to us. The furniture that we're sitting at, it's not furniture, it's called a table. So it made that available to us. I also want to thank Andrea Newton, who is the executive director of the Urban Land Institute Northwest chapter, and she's here. She's been a helpful planner in making this happen these past months. Also, Rebecca Rago from Challenge Seattle is with us today. These people have been active participants in making today happen. I'm grateful for them. I also want to thank a number of folks who deserve to be thanked. Calypso Chicken for our lunch today. Flowers by A New Leaf. Love Gold Events, who graciously donated linens. Joe Timmons, who of course is a state rep, but he's also been working temporarily in my office as a special projects manager, who came in and helped coordinate this event and did a great job. And I want to thank the city's BTV 10 over there in the corner, Ben Skudlerick and Adam Grossberg, for providing technology and AV support. Very quickly, what we're going to do today is I'm going to introduce the governor, who's going to give a keynote address and inform us more about the nature of the Cascadia Innovation Corridor and all that that entails. After that, we'll take question and answers for her. Then I'm going to introduce Blake Lyons, our Bellingham planning director, who's going to introduce a panel of people that we have that are going to elaborate on a variety of things, including housing and transportation and future technologies and economies that we anticipate existing in the years ahead. And then we're going to have a little table breakout where we're going to have coordinated events. We'll have people at each table who are going to oversee some question and answer. We look forward to just getting some thoughts from you about that. And then I'll close it up. Our goal is to be done at 2:30. And then later, I think some of you are signed up for a tour today over at the waterfront. That's going to be a fun opportunity to hear about what's going to be happening on our waterfront and how we can continue to have an inspired vision for what's going to be happening there. And then later at 4 o'clock at Culshan Brewery at Trackside, there's going to be an opportunity for people that wish to attend to go over and have a beer and socialize and talk about today. With that, I am going to introduce Governor Christine Gregoire, our keynote speaker. Christine Gregoire is the CEO of Challenge Seattle, which is an alliance of CEOs from 22 of the region's largest organizations who work together to tackle some of our most pressing civic challenges, such as homelessness and racial equity. As CEO of Challenge Seattle, Chris serves as the Washington co-chair for the Cascadia Innovation Corridor. Previously, Chris served for 2 terms as governor of the state of Washington with a $32 billion biennial budget and over 60,000 employees. In her first term as governor, she created the Department of Early Learning and led on reforms to the K-12 system and investment in higher education. Chris led the state in a historical investment in infrastructure, including the building of the largest floating bridge in the world and the largest transportation tunnel to open up Seattle's waterfront. She addressed the water wars in the state and established the Puget Sound Initiative to restore one of our nation's major estuaries. She led an historic number of trade missions, reformed the foster care system to protect children, and was among the first to lead in healthcare reform. During her second term, Chris led the state major reforms, management, and budgeting to position the state as one of the most financially secure to come out of the Great Recession. Prior to becoming governor, Chris served for 3 terms as Attorney General for the state, and prior to that, Chris served 4 years as the director of the State Department of Ecology. In addition to being CEO of Challenge Seattle, Chris is a former chair of the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center and former member of the National Bipartisan Governors Council. So with that, I would like to at this time introduce former governor of the state of Washington, Christine Gregoire.
Great. Well, thank you, Mayor. It's just a delight, though I wish I was there with you to join all of you today. And I understand a very distinguished group of leaders from Whatcom County. When the mayor said I had a close contact with COVID, in fact, it's my husband, unfortunately, who has COVID. Neither one of us have ever had it. But the doctor said he definitely would not recommend that I come up and expose you, and I share that view. So again, I'm very sorry that I can't be with you today. The mayor really began this conversation with me when he and I were serving on a committee to talk about how Puget Sound Energy could get to a net zero in terms of its emissions. And I said, let's go. I would love to be a part of it and help in any way we can. So I'm here as co-chair of the Cascadia Innovation Corridor, but let me just share, once I finished my tenure as governor, I began working on a number of areas with a major set of CEOs. We began looking at the challenges that we were facing in our state, and in particular, quite frankly, in the corridor related to things like population growth, related to lack of affordable housing, increased homelessness, traffic congestion, and climate change. And we began having discussions with Oregon and British Columbia, comparing notes and so on, and realized that the challenges that we have are no different than theirs. And it just doesn't have a border. And so we discovered, of course, that we have the Cascadia corridor, that it had been designated as a mega region. And we said, let's put some life into it. Let's start really formalizing our partnership, because the bottom line is we're willing to tackle issues that others won't or don't, because that's just who we are. That's our DNA in Cascadia. So it's that spirit of collaboration, that spirit of innovation that brought us to define Cascadia very different than any other mega region in the world. So I'm going to talk with you today a little bit about that, how we're working together to address those challenges I've identified. But first, I want to start out and introduce to you how we became a mega region, and how others around the globe also did. Next slide, please. As our global economy has grown exponentially, so too have certain areas around the globe that really constitute the world's economy. Many years ago, economic powerhouses were cities, whether it was New York or Paris or London. Those then grew more into a regional idea. And from there, it has developed this idea of mega regions. So as was indicated by the mayor, there are over 40 internationally. There are about 16 in the United States. We're a fairly unique one because we cross a state border and an international border. The evolution happened when we were all just sitting there right before our eyes, literally. And once remote areas have now become parts of mega regions, they have seen things change, and they haven't necessarily planned for that change. And that's what I think the mayor and his leadership and his team are trying to do now, is really make sure that for Bellingham, Whatcom County, we're really planning for those kinds of changes. Next slide, please. So we're the home, Cascadia, that is, of about 10 million people. That was a 30% increase in population from 2000 to 2020. We do have an international reputation for innovation and for collaboration. We also have a reputation for global leadership and our shared love of natural beauty. And that's really who we are and what we are all about. So our mega region is comprised of Portland, Oregon, through Seattle to Vancouver, British Columbia. Our combined GDP is about $600 billion, which is about the same as the entire nation of Switzerland. We are known, as I said, for our entrepreneurship. In 2022, Oregon and Washington were some of the top states for business in the US. We are academic powerhouses, as the mayor just mentioned, with Western and the other three that he mentioned. And we have world-class tech talent. Vancouver and Seattle are among the top 10 cities in the world for that. While action at the city and regional level is the foundation for a successful mega region, we cannot expect our ability to solve mega regional problems without greater collaboration, without greater alignment across our borders. So we need to start thinking more along those lines, and how we might be able to ensure continued economic growth, but also in a way that's smart. And that's what led us to supercharge Cascadia, because we believe the opportunity with all of us was sitting right before our eyes. Next slide, please. The Cascadia Innovation Corridor is how we bring together regional leaders for cross-border collaboration, with a shared goal that, as the mayor mentioned, we want to be the first sustainable mega region literally in the world. From ultra high-speed ground transportation to connect the corridor, to reimagining agriculture with technology, we're thinking big. We think we need to, if we want to see a bright, healthy, prosperous future for all our residents. Challenge Seattle and the Business Council of British Columbia came together to serve as co-chairs of the Cascadia Innovation Corridor. And we decided to define ourselves different than any other mega region, which all of them are almost exclusively focused on economic development. Well, we see that as a priority. We also see the opportunity because of our innovation and our collaboration to solve some of the most pressing problems in the corridor and then share our success with others around the globe. We work through committees, as you can see here. They have geographic reach, they have influence, and they have expertise in key areas where we believe we can excel. So I'll dig into some places where we are already doing so in just a minute, including a new committee on public-private partnerships, transportation in the corridor, and cross-border collaboration. Most years, as the mayor indicated, we have an annual conference and we bring together leaders across the corridor. We believe that 2022 was probably one of our most successful. Now, you can say it was because it was located at Semiahmoo, um, but it was focused on climate action. And I know some of you might have attended it. Our kickoff keynote speaker was Bill Gates. I'm sure that's why some people came. This year, we're holding a bit of a different event than what we have historically. It's a summit of elected leaders across the corridor where we want to talk about ultra high speed ground transportation, what it can mean, what it should mean, really what it should be about. Mayor Fleetwood and other electeds are invited to attend. I think you'll hear more about it a little bit later with a panel, but I will also address it with you as well. Our ambition in the Cascadia mega region, beyond being an economic driver, is really that we have the wherewithal, if we are bold and thoughtful, to become a sustainable mega region. Next slide, please. Our goal is to address the challenges that have come with an increasing population by seizing the opportunity now to plan for and become that sustainable mega region. You know, we look at what's happened to us now and ask ourselves, couldn't we have anticipated some of these challenges? Well, maybe if we have planned ahead, and I hope we've learned that lesson. And that's really what this is about. It's not planning ahead for 2-4 years on election cycles. It's planning ahead 20 years because we can see a population growth that will continue like what we've experienced already. We decided to define a sustainable mega region as one that steps up to 3 big challenges. One, the affordable housing crisis throughout the corridor, the traffic congestion in the corridor, and the climate goals of Paris Accord. Each of those is critical if we're going to be able to be sustainable. And with our projected growth, we just have to act now. Next slide, please. We expect yet another 3 to 4 million people in the Cascadia corridor by 2050. This means the current growing pains that we're going through will only worsen if we do not act and begin acting now. If we are able to accommodate that 30% increase, incremental improvements are not going to cut it. We need to move now. We need to move quickly. We need to embrace big, bold ideas as we prepare to be a mega region that will continue to value the quality of life of all of its residents. It's why we created what we call Vision 2050. Next slide, please. It calls on us to act now, plan for our future, and directly confront our shared challenges. Across our major cities, over a third of the renters are cost burdened, putting more than 30% of their income towards rent. And we know affordable housing has become a crisis up and down the corridor and the cause of much of our dramatic increase in homelessness. Across our 2 states and the province, we've seen an increase of 10 to 20% in the rates of homelessness. Our transportation challenges, well, for the average commuter in the Rega region, we spend about 11 plus days per year commuting. Now we're seeing what we call mega commuters, those commuting more than 90 minutes each way. Portland and Seattle have seen a 70 to 80% growth in mega commuters from 2010 to 2017. That equates to over $7.1 billion in lost productivity per year. And we're both seeing the impacts of climate change. After the devastating flood of 2021, the residents of Whatcom know all too well that that was not unique, that that's going to happen again, and unfortunately may be worse. I got caught in it myself. trying to get to British Columbia for one of our conferences and tried every conceivable back way I could, and then ended up back at SeaTac and took a flight. We've all seen firsthand the impacts of wildfires in BC, Oregon, and Washington. We've had the worst air quality in the world, suffered billions in economic damage, lost crops and businesses. And our communities, like those in Whatcom County, are under continuous threat of wildfires. As community leaders, all of you here today know that hard work takes action, not just words and talk. So we've tried to emulate that in Cascadia. Next slide, please. At Cascadia, we're working to build the workforce that we're going to need if we're going to be able to address the climate crisis, while we're also using our institutions of higher education to join us in solving some of the issues we're having to address because of the lack of affordable housing. I want to talk about 3 specific areas by way of example of the actions that we're trying to take. We're trying to make progress in our cross-border collaboration, in the wildfires that are facing us, and in connecting our corridor through ultra-high-speed rail. First, cross-border collaboration. One of our cross-border co-chairs, Lori Troutman, I think is in the audience today. She is amazing. The committee that she leads have played a major role in finding ways to reduce emissions at the border and ensure connecting us to our jobs and to our economies. Lori and her team at Western received a grant. It's a 2-year grant, cross-border, with Simon Fraser University to study how the pandemic border restrictions disproportionately impact different segments of our society in both Canada and the US. This important work builds on other efforts from this subcommittee to understand the health, safety, and security impacts of the pandemic closures, and hopefully prevent, should we have one again, such devastating closures in the future and the results of what we saw. Most recently, the committee has discussed the World Cup 2026. I remember back in my day as governor when we talked about Canada hosting the Olympics and them saying they couldn't be successful if the border wasn't working better. We went to work, created a new license, driver's license that now every state and every province along our border have implemented as well. Most recently, that committee has really stood up to any and every challenge that has been delivered to them. And I want to thank profusely Lori and her leadership for doing such a wonderful job. Second issue is wildfires. Next slide, please. One of the priorities for our newest committee, which is Public-Private Partnerships for Climate, is wildfires. This came out of our conference at Semiahmoo. Through Challenge Seattle, we produced a report just this year in June that highlighted the public's critical role in preventing megafires in Washington, considering 81% of the wildfires that we experience in our state are human caused. We've amplified that work through a public education campaign. We plan to build on it through this subcommittee. We're bringing folks together in a webinar to talk about how can we work together, because wildfires also know no border. So finally, I'd like to, with the next slide, talk to you about ultra-high-speed transportation. A key strategy to achieving a sustainable megaregion is building a transportation system that absorbs that projected 30% increase in population without an increase in traffic congestion like what we're experiencing now. The ultra-high-speed corridor can move people quickly and reliably. We took a tour of what the oldest in the world in Japan last year and saw exactly the opportunities that we can have. Right now, existing travel options in the region are increasingly congested. Buses and cars find unpredictable travel times, delays on I-5. Air travelers are contending with airport access and security times that are sometimes longer than the actual flight itself. Imagine a trip taking approximately 1 hour to travel from Vancouver, British Columbia to Seattle, Washington. Ultra high speed can connect our people. It can produce good paying jobs. It can build on our economy. It can build affordable housing. That makes our corridor more equitable. And it brings us greener transportation solutions, which will help to protect our fragile environment and combat greenhouse gas emissions. So I hope all this has given you a window into Cascadia and its potential. Now we need to ask you to get engaged, get involved, and be a partner. Next slide, please. Action needs to happen at literally every level, including this community. Next slide, please. And that means at the community level, where we drive progress and we sustain the vision. Many of you already are leading on issues like housing and transportation and climate. Our call is to bring all of us together, our expertise, our collaboration, our ability to build a mega region we can all be proud of as we look to the future. To engage us directly, you can follow what's happening at Cascadia via our internet website at connectcascadia.com. You can connect with our subcommittees who typically have meetings and webinars if any of those are of particular interest to you. You can join us in next year's conference. We are likely because both governors and the premier would like us to focus on affordable housing. And most immediately later today, you'll have a chance, as the mayor indicated, to put your thoughts and feedback on the table with the mayor, who intends to educate us on where you are, what you want, what we can join together to do. The next panel is going to dig into what action the city, county, and many groups and communities could look like. They'll discuss transportation, housing, economic development, three of our major pillars. The future that we envision for Cascadia is within our grasp. It starts in a room like this with the leadership of the mayor. It takes planning, it takes persistence. Most importantly, it takes partnership. It'll take all of us joining together, individuals and organizations, to address these crises that we face and plan for a prosperous future. So with that, I thank you again for the invitation. And I apologize I can't be there in person. But Mayor, if we have time, I'm happy to take a question or two.
So, Rebecca, if people have questions, raise your hand. We've got someone with a mic over here, and happy to ask. We've got one over here, Guy Ochigroso.
First and foremost, Governor, thank you so much for taking up this topic, and many of the topics have challenged Seattle. And Mr. Mayor, thank you. Thanks for leading this conversation for our community at this point in time. Some of us in the room have been engaged in this conversation for about 7-8 years, and I have to make a special shout out to Mr. Chris Roselli for, at times, I think we're the single human engaged in that conversation for our community. So Chris, thanks for carrying the torch for us. My question is with regards over the next couple of years. Clearly, this is a long-term planning process, but I think with the World Cup, we have a very unique opportunity to stress test, if we will, some of our systems. And so I'm curious as to what are the plans, maybe the collaboration has some ideas of what are the short-term goals or tests that we should be doing. What should we as a community be looking out for? Because it's certainly on my radar already, and I don't really know what to tell everyone. So that's kind of my broad question. Thank you.
I got it. Thank you. We just hosted in Seattle, our state did, Major League Baseball. And we got an opportunity to see really what it takes to get ready for an event of that nature. When we look at the World Cup, it is so much bigger than what we just hosted in Seattle. We will be in the mind's eye of the world globally. It will be multiples of what we experience in MLB. So we've been talking considerably about, we got a limited amount of time. How do we really step up? And that's why the conference step up and address the issue of affordable housing and homelessness. Because if we want to present well, we have to present really as communities up and down the corridor that understand this issue and have taken it on and have been successful. So that's one. Two, transportation. We're looking at, are there immediate things that we can do that will show that we can easily transport people up and down the corridor? Lori's looking at specifically how do we make that border crossing work really efficiently and effectively. But how do we also get people to stop off in Bellingham and see how wonderful it is and what it has to offer and so on. So there's more, but those are two that Cascadia is involved in that bring to mind really what we are trying to focus on now, so that when the world sees us, the Cascadia corridor, they see really a wonderful place that steps up to its challenges, has challenges like everybody does, but will step up to them and show success because we're innovative, we're creative, we're bold in our thinking, and we're collaborative. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Governor. One more coming your way.
Good afternoon, Governor Gregoire. My name is Liz Purdy, and I'm with Puget Sound Energy. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. When I was in middle school in Seattle, my parents voted on whether or not we would replace the 99 viaduct with a tunnel. And I was wondering what lessons learned from projects of that nature will help inform how we build things like high-speed ground travel in the corridor.
Boy, that was an education I have to share with you. And when we were trying to look at the viaduct, was lucky that it survived the Nisqually earthquake. Less than 15 seconds, or actually I think less than 10, it was ready to go down. So had it lasted just seconds more, it would have gone down. The seawall would have collapsed, and with that, the viaduct would have collapsed. So we had to do something. But I tell you, the controversy around it was amazing to me to see. And so what we need to do is really engage the public. That's why ultra high speed lesson learned is engage, not top down, but bottom up. Let the people at the local level tell us what they want, how they want it done, what they're looking for. The other thing is some real good lessons, frankly, that I learned in talking to folks in Boston, Massachusetts, as you might imagine, Vancouver, British Columbia, San Francisco, California, was that when you do a mega project like what we were trying to undertake, you're going to find unforeseen things happen. And when that happens, you will see some who say, forget it, it's over, it's done. Stay the course, don't give up. And what they suggested to me was all that controversy and all that negativism, once the thing is up and operational, will dissipate and people will look back and say, why didn't we do that a long time ago? I was in disbelief about that, to be frank with you, but the truth be told, that is exactly what happened. So primarily bottom up, engage the whole community up and down the corridor. Let's meet the needs. Let's answer the questions. Let's rethink things that need to be rethought. And quite candidly, if ultimately there's a better solution, let's hear that better solution. But let's thoughtfully make decisions. When we make decisions, let's go. Let's not give up. Let's not turn around. Let's get going. But I'll tell you, it's not going to come on if we build it. It's not going to come quickly. And if we're going to be prepared for that 30% increase in population and the demands on the transportation system, we need to get going now. So this fall, we're hoping that we will see the first major investment by the federal government in this project. We're on the map. We're talked about frequently in Washington, D.C. And in particular, they're enthused because Canada is enthused and wants to see this as their model to do other places in Canada as well. So I'm excited about what we have already done, but we've got a lot more to do, and engaging with you is the top priority right now?
Governor, I want to thank you for coming today and being our keynote. We appreciate it enormously. Could we have a round of applause for Governor Gregoire? All right, at this time, I'm going to invite our planning director at the City of Bellingham, Blake Lyon, to come on up. Blake's been with us for a year and a half now. He's been a fantastic addition to the City of Bellingham leadership team. He comes to us with enormous knowledge and experience in the field of planning. Originally from California, he worked in a number of different places, including Redwood City, for a number of years, then went to Oregon, Florida, for what was it, 8 years? 8 years, and we were able to get him here in Bellingham. So I'm absolutely, we're so happy to have you, Blake. You've just been fantastic. Blake is going to come up and moderate the panel of folks that we've got here. He's going to introduce them. There's going to be statements made by them and then some question and answer that Blake is going to facilitate. And then when we're done with that, as I said, we're going to have just a relatively short exercise at the tables, and then we'll call it a wrap. So, Blake Lyon.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. It was interesting when I was looking at the mega regions that are around the country. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, so I certainly grew up experiencing that kind of mega city. And then as the mayor mentioned, I moved forward to Northern California and worked in Redwood City, which is on the San Francisco Peninsula. So I experienced a lot of that mega region and was somewhat involved on the periphery of the California high-speed rail. So this is an interesting evolution of that discussion for me. But I wanted to invite our panelists to come up, if you would, please, and take your seats. As we have them do that, one of the things that I was thinking about, I was kind of invoking some thoughts from my 15-year-old, and the words of Lin-Manuel Miranda came to mind, and that is being in the room where it happens. And that's really kind of what I encourage you all to do. We heard a lot from the governor and setting the tone and the message and the bigger construct. And the panelist that's here today in front of you and prepared to answer various different questions are really allowing us to leverage their expertise and take that broader concept and that vision down to a little bit more practical level, although I am going to ask you not to get into specific Bellingham questions in terms of where the high-speed rail alignment might go or where a station might go or those kind of details. We really want to keep it kind of at that next tier and go through that. So I'm going to give them each an opportunity to introduce themselves, to make a few opening comments, and then we'll prepared to allow you to ask questions, and we certainly have some questions that we can prompt as well. So, Brian, I'm going to start with you if you don't mind.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me up here in beautiful Bellingham. Excuse me. I'm the CEO of an organization called Greater Seattle Partners. We're a three-county regional economic development organization and international trade group focusing on Snohomish, King, and Pierce counties. And I think one of the reasons I'm excited about this conversation is because it allows us to really lean into this concept of a mega region and why in our long-term success as a region, sustainability as a region, we need to start thinking like this. We need to start thinking at a scale, but we want to do it in a way that makes sense for us as a community. We've got some really unique assets that we value, and we think this is a very special part of the world. And so how do we think about this concept of mega regions, but make it work for us as we collectively try to solve some of our biggest challenges facing us now and, 10, 15, 100 years down the road. So look forward to the conversation.
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Amy Scarton. I am the Deputy Secretary of Transportation for the state. I've been at WashDOT for nearly a decade now, so it's great to see so many faces in the audience that I've worked with before. And prior to my work as the deputy, I ran Washington State Ferries for 4 years. And prior to coming to Washington State, I was back in Washington, D.C., where for 15 years I worked in federal transportation, either in the House of Representatives or twice in the administration. What I'm excited about today is really what we're talking about is providing our constituents options. These are options that we should be listening to and working on and brainstorming about, because mobility is multifaceted. And I think far too long, the State Department of Transportations around the country, we have been fantastic departments of roads. And that is not our job. And so one of the things that Secretary Millar and I often say about WashDOT is we are the most multimodal state DOT. We are here to offer you, yes, a wonderful trip on I-5 and a trip on a ferry and a trip on a bus and a train and a bicycle and walking or rolling down the street. And so this is just part of our broader vision to be multimodal and to provide you with options.
On? There we go. Perfect. Hey, everybody. I'm Gabe Grant. I'm a partner at Spectrum Development Solutions. We are a Seattle-based developer of affordable and workforce housing, student housing, and healthcare and other civic types of projects. For about the last 25 years now, remarkably, I've been working on the development of housing both in Seattle and also on the East Coast, and it's been a terrific career. It's also been it's hard. Development of housing is it's a real challenge, and so I'm excited to be able to kind of be the voice of housing on this panel today. I think the thing that's most exciting to me about this corridor idea is that I think there's nothing like a big, inspiring vision to bring people together to solve other major problems. So this may be about high-speed rail, but I think it can be about a lot more than that too, catalyzing really important conversations around economic development and around housing too. So happy to be part of the conversation up here.
Great. Thank you all. This really is a question that I'm hoping that all three of you may be able to opine on. Are there other regions around the U.S. or the world where you feel like they have done a particularly good job that we can look to build off of those, that direction, that leadership? What have they done to help cultivate that prosperity and that improvement in the quality of life? So just who do we look to in those contexts?
I'll go ahead and start. Part of the many hats that I wear at Greater Seattle Partners is taking leaders from our region to international communities and trying to understand best practices and glean the best ideas from places that are doing some remarkable things. Since the end of COVID, we've been able to take 2 delegations to Tokyo in November of last year, and we took another delegation to Oslo, Norway, earlier this year. And yesterday, we just announced that we're taking a delegation to South Korea in first quarter of next year. And we picked those regions because, obviously, Tokyo and Seoul, Korea are, cities and regions, frankly, of millions of people. But they've done some things, made some investments that look beyond the center city there, that look beyond kind of these arbitrary borders that we have that define city to communities outside of the central city. But they had to make some really important investments to make sure that commerce remains dynamic, that people can move, that capital can come into these communities, and that livability becomes really paramount as they build out those communities. So and the trip to Tokyo was illuminating because we all know about the bullet train, and it's so interesting in the American context. We struggle, frankly, with the idea of high-speed rail. We have these amazing and long debates because they're hard. They impact communities and they're expensive. But literally a generation and a half ago, Japan made a decision that they are going to build a high-speed rail system there that united that country. And when you look at what Tokyo did and that investment, and how it really touched pretty much every other aspect of life in Japan, whether again their economy, being central to their economy, looking at housing, as expensive as we think Japan is, in many ways they've handled their housing crisis a lot better than Americans have, because they had this linkage that was the backbone that their high-speed rail created for their entire country. And it was really, really powerful. And those type of investments, you may not see the impact, for a generation or two, but they're so critical. And oftentimes, the time horizon for these investments, they outlast most politicians. And so it takes a lot of courage, frankly, and community support to make those type of investments. But the trip to Tokyo was very illuminating, and just the power of that type of investment and what it meant for Japan.
Sure. And Brian, I'm so glad that you use the international examples, because when I first heard your question, I immediately began to think of what are our domestic examples of really good integrated transportation systems. And so I first thought of the Northeast Corridor. It's on Governor Gregoire's map. Any of us who have been to DC, New York, Boston, you know how integral passenger rail is to that region. And I think what they've done right is they've kept their modes alive and integrated well. And one of my favorite fact points about passenger train ridership here in Washington State is that, other than the Northeast Corridor, there is no other Amtrak line, no other passenger rail line in the US where there's an origin and destination pair that beats the aviation market than ours. So what I mean by that is, when you divide, let's say, a trip between Seattle and Portland, you divide it by the aviation trips, the rail trips, and the road trips, we have more people taking Amtrak Cascades passenger rail between Seattle and Portland than we do who choose to go to the airport and fly there. So that shows that we have the good service and we have the folks in our state who are willing and enjoy taking passenger rail. And so I see those parallels between us and the Northeast, and I think we just build on it by continuing to invest.
Great example. So I promise you, Brian and I did not collude before this panel. But as I was thinking about this over the last couple of evenings, Tokyo is the example that came to mind as a region in the world that has really made some very, very good decisions. And as you mentioned, many of those decisions were made quite a while ago. But in that region, they have encouraged the development of housing for decades and decades, and their housing production has kept pace with population growth. And so they don't have the same affordable housing crisis that we have in our region. I think there are also some cultural things there that I think we can look to as we think about the future of housing here that are pretty important as well. One is just the acceptance of smaller homes. One is the acceptance of rental housing as a norm that isn't considered to be sort of like a second class type of housing. And the third is living without the dependence on a car, being able to live a very good life without owning an automobile. And I think that if we were able to, in this region over the course of the next generation, begin to adopt some of those cultural norms as well, I think some of the solutions to our housing crisis might be easier to find.
So I want to make sure as this conversation progresses that if any of you in the audience have questions that you would like to engage with the panelists, don't be shy about trying to draw my attention to you, and I'll certainly engage that. But as you think about that, and as we continue to move forward a little bit, I wanted to ask Brian a little bit of a more specific question. And what industry or what sectors do you think would be most critical to the future kind of the Puget Sound mega region, and what can we do to kind of improve or invest in these particular industries?
It's a great question. Again, Gabe and I did not conclude, but we did chat earlier today, and we were talking a bit about what's the perception of our region. And when I say our region, I know internally this is inside baseball, right? Like, this is family here. Seattle, it triggers certain things. It triggers certain reactions from people when you say that word Seattle, right? And I'm not going to get into like how fair or not that is, but the rest of the world, Seattle is all of this, and that's just the reality. We hosted this past month a 3.5-week conference, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation. It's one of the leading trade forums in the world. 21 member economies from the Pacific Rim. I say economies, not governments, because Taiwan is one of those economies, and don't want to get into that. But they came to Seattle, spent 3.5 weeks downtown Seattle. They took tours up to Skagit. They went down into Pierce County. They went over to Kitsap. In their minds, all of that is Seattle. So that's a part of a conversation and just kind of awareness that we all kind of have to just acknowledge that it's out there. Once we're inside the family, we can have our own conversations about what's Seattle and what's not Seattle. But to the rest of the world, so with that preface, the rest of the world wants to invest in our region. They see Boeing, they see Microsoft, they see Amazon, they see all these other global brands and what that means. It means innovation. It doesn't mean stagnation, because every one of those companies are engaged in some of the most important trends that we need to be paying attention to. AI, sustainability, life sciences. Like, we are literally at the knife's edge on all those spaces. Specifically, what I believe our region, when we start thinking about Cascadia broadly, the values that we have, especially around sustainability and this beautiful environment that we all love and that has nurtured generations of us, that is where I personally believe our long-term economic health and security will reside. When I talk to executives at Boeing and Alaska Airlines, they're not investing in sustainable aviation fuels just because it looks good on an annual social report. They are looking down the road, saying, how do we make sure that this industry can be successful, but also achieve real climate goals? There's real investment taking place in that space. Hydrogen. Our region is becoming a hydrogen hub. All the ports that we have, whether it's Port of Seattle, Port of Everett, up into to Canada, those ports are going to have to modernize, and hydrogen is going to be such a big part of that. We need, as a region, plant our flag and own this particular economic segment, because that is where, again, we're going to be able to drive a lot of our long-term success and, frankly, contribute in a positive way to many of our global climate goals. But that is where I feel like our investments really, really can take hold.
Thank you. I wanted to, Amy, this next question is for you, and really touch a little bit on, in your introductory comments, you talked about the positioning your space in that multimodal frame of mind. And in your experience, as we think about this from a Bellingham and Whatcom County context, and if we're putting ourselves in the position where the high-speed ground transportation is a reality, what are some of the other feeder systems, such as light rail, rapid bus, micromobilities, that we as a kind of a smaller sub-region of that bigger area need to be kind of giving advanced thought to and consideration of?
Yeah, all of them. All of them. You know, there isn't a high-speed rail line out there in the US or in Europe that doesn't have good multimodal connections, both in the large city hubs and in the smaller city hubs. So the current passenger rail service that we have will be integral to feeding people into eventual high-speed rail. Our transit systems, be they light rail, bus, or micro, they will all be integral. I'll give you one example. There is a new line being built. It's called Desert Express. It's to get folks from the LA region out to Las Vegas. They're not even building the line into downtown LA. They're building the line into the ex-urban town of Rancho Cucamonga. It's an hour or more outside of LA, depending on traffic. But they chose, this private company is choosing that exurb because that is where the current LA commuter rail train ends. So they're telling folks, use your current systems to get out of downtown and then link up with us out here to take the longer, higher speed trip to Vegas. That's a really exciting project. You look at Florida right now, today. You can go to Orlando, get on a brand new higher speed passenger rail train, take it over to the coast, go to Fort Lauderdale, West Palm, Boca, Miami, today. These are all of the communities in the state coming together, using their existing transit services, some of their existing lines, and imagining where new lines can go. So it's all on the table.
And just a personal note as a follow-up to that, there was a mention earlier about thinking kind of generations ahead, and I mentioned in the kind of introductory comments myself that I was born and raised in Los Angeles, and for those of you that don't know the history of Los Angeles, they had one of the largest networks of streetcars and public transit systems that this country had, and it was unfortunately the CEO of GM at the time, Edward Sloan, that had bought up the private bus lines and removed all of those streetcar lines. And it wasn't until this most recent several decades that they started to put the Metrolink back in and to really try to grow that transit back to where it was at one point in time. So there are opportunities to do that. It's not just because we've made some poor decisions in the past that we can't reimagine and re-envision ourselves moving forward. And so Los Angeles being the metropolitan area that it is a unique example of how we can kind of reintroduce those and really take advantage of those components. Gabe, I wanted to circle back to you a little bit and talk about, you know, like other cities around the Puget Sound mega region, Bellingham is experiencing housing shortages, and we heard the governor talking about that across the way. Are there examples of cities or you know, entities around the country that you feel like are taking a pointed approach at that housing crisis? And can you give us a little bit of context of what you think at a local scale we can be focusing on and doing?
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah. And, you know, as the governor was talking about preparing for the growth in the Cascadia region, the slide that she shared talks about adding another 3 to 4 million people to the region by 2050. And I started doing some very quick math in my head. And that means we probably need a couple million more units of housing by 2050, which means we probably need to be building about 100,000 units a year between now and then just to keep up. Right? So the scale of what we're talking about is it's really pretty extraordinary. I think at the local level, there isn't an example of one place that I think is just doing it great. There's as I was thinking about this question, there are a lot of municipalities out there and state agencies that are doing really great things. And I think, you know, a place like Bellingham can sort of think of that as like a buffet in a way and sort of pick the things that are best suited for this community. But I think the things that I have seen work really well are in the sort of spirit of public-private partnership. So things like the multifamily tax exemption program, which is like state-enabled program that local jurisdictions adopt, and it is essentially a break on real estate taxes in exchange for building affordable housing. That has been by far and away the biggest source of affordable housing production in the city of Seattle. It has one enormous flaw to it, in my opinion, and that is that it expires after 12 years. And so it's like a bucket with a hole in the bottom of it. You pour water into it, and every year, units are just leaking out of the bottom of it. Every year, we're losing units out of the MFTE program. So what about like renewal? There are tons of properties that would voluntarily renew into that program. So something like that. I think cities that have been really flexible in terms of like thinking about urban village zoning, where there's flexibility around things like parking requirements and building heights and things like that. I think those have been really successful. I think we're going to have to do. I think municipalities are going to have to do a lot more thinking about how to use publicly owned land in a better way towards affordable housing. And it's not just municipalities. There are all sorts of other, there are state agencies, there are there's city government, there are utilities, et cetera. There's a lot of land that is in public ownership that is not being used in many cases really at all right now. So those are a few examples of things that come to mind.
Sepal.
We need to look at the quality of part life of it. People are living in large cities, large places, but they are lonely. They're alone. We have lost the community aspect. What we are trying to do, I'll come with the question as well. So what we are trying to do is contiguously expand whatever we have. Why are not we building new cities? A lot of countries in the world are doing that. If we have that kind of transformational plans of transportation, everything, we could create a lot of 25,000, 30,000 communities, which can be a really community. When you have a city like Seattle or Vancouver, nobody belongs to any place. The kids, our next generation is growing up, they don't get to drugs just because of it. Right? There are things which drive them to that, and that is the quality of life part of it. While we are planning all this, how we can transport from one place to the other or earn your living, we need to look at our next generations, how we can bring that quality to them as well. Thank you.
If I may, I'll offer a little personal context on that very thing, because I think part of what we've heard the panel say today opens up some of those opportunities to have that sense of community at a different scale. Having worked and lived in the Silicon Valley area and seen some of the mega commuters, and the term that they often use there is drive to qualify, and the thought is that in order to be able to afford a home in that particular region, every mile you drive further out of that region, the housing price comes down a corresponding amount. And so, Sepal, you're absolutely right. That sense of community gets lost in that mega commute. But when you have the opportunity to ride a train, which I did, Caltrain as an example, you have a sense of community. You get that time back. You can read, you can listen to a podcast, you can disengage from the commute itself, and you have the opportunity to engage on a more personal level in ways that you can do that. Younger sibling of mine had some health issues and couldn't drive. And so the ability to be able to take transit and to connect and to get to education and job opportunities opens up that possibility for independence and freedom at a scale. One of the greatest examples of moving here to Bellingham for me is that I have 3 young kids. and two of them are of the age where they can use WTA and they can be independent and take that, that bus ride and be able to do the things with their friends that don't rely on them, as Gabe had mentioned earlier, to get into a vehicle to do that. So it's a matter of trying to think through ways to connect all those pieces and finding communities within that as well. So thank you for your comment, your statement. Guy, you had a question?
If I may ask too, to state your name and organization, please, as well. Thanks.
Guy Achagrasso, Bellingham Regional Chamber of Commerce. To Sat Paul's question, I think, and Blake, you and I have had this conversation a bit, sense of place, competing with, let's say, workforce challenges, housing challenges. I don't think we're having a robust enough dialogue in the interactions and how we adequately plan for people that, let's say, may not work in a place. As a person that gets to represent a lot of businesses, we need housing for people to show up to work and show up virtually wherever they are. But my question goes back to the high-speed rail piece. As someone that's been following this conversation for a few years, I certainly have my concerns, and I'm going to hedge them and filter them so I can kind of hear your thoughts. High-speed rail, particularly if you compare it to Tokyo and I guess greater Japan, in a system that connects intentionally Seattle and Vancouver as priorities, does Bellingham have a stop? Can Bellingham have a stop on a high-speed system? And what are the repercussions of that?
I'll take that one. So can it? Of course it can, right? Anywhere in between Vancouver, Seattle, Portland can have a stop. But we are at the very beginning of the imagination phase, right? We do not yet have an alignment. We haven't even laid out which alignments we're going to study. We are looking forward to winning some big federal dollars here in November, and then we can embark on our planning and environmental linkages work in which we can look at the trade-offs of different alignments. But everything we've done up until now has been looking at, is the concept viable? Do we have support around the state? It's been very preliminary work. Is there a business case for this? We've done 4 studies now looking at different angles. They're all available on the WashDOT website. We're at the place now where we're ready to answer those questions, and we're going to win the federal money to do it.
I'll also offer a little maybe fun anecdote from the planning side of things. And that is, we used to have a saying when I was coming up in the department about what's worse than the Walmart in your town. It's the one that's in the town right next to you, because it draws all your sales tax dollars out of your town. And so from my perspective, with regard to Bellingham and what Amy's saying is, we want to be in the room and having that conversation. We want to understand what the implications are. We want to be able to have that dialogue around that space, regardless of where it goes. Because if we're not even at the table to have that conversation, then it's a bigger problem, in my opinion. All right. Next question I wanted, again, to all of you is, I was wondering if you could take a moment and maybe highlight for us some key and critical partnerships that we mentioned. We heard earlier a comment about public-private partnerships or these relationships, and so much of what this confluence of folks here is about is bringing that conversation to the forefront and developing those partnerships. If you could touch on maybe in your respective fields, what are some of the partnerships that have meant the most and helped you further your objectives? I'd appreciate that.
I can start first, just on the high-speed rail project. One of the very first entities that put in dollars to help the state study high-speed rail was Microsoft. So from the very beginning of the state contemplating, is this even possible, we had private sector participation. I think as we have matured, we've looked to our fellow states, Oregon, British Columbia. They have put in hard dollars to our planning process. So it's the states, it's the private sector, but it's also groups like Challenge Seattle. It's groups like the Chambers of Commerce, folks who are bringing a variety of business and civic leaders to the table to help us brainstorm.
I think what's really unique about the vision for Cascadia is versus some of the other mega regions that we see across the U.S., we're dealing with our neighbors to the north. And I think that adds a whole nother dimension of complexity, frankly, obviously, because cross-border issues, but also another layer of opportunity that these other regions just don't have. And obviously, here in Bellingham, you're what, 20, 30 miles from the border. So you're dealing with Canada all the time, so this is not a foreign concept. And you've been able to take advantage of those relationships, but you also understand that there could be better ways to engage. And so the partnership that I think that's emerged through this Cascadia Innovation Corridor conversation, bringing British Columbia and Washington State and Oregon into an opportunity to just be at the same table to start thinking big, thinking bold, because, in a perfect world, that border crossing would be a lot easier and a lot more free-flowing for ideas and people and commerce and just all the things that we love about the connection between us and Canada. I think the fact that British Columbia sees the same opportunity through this Cascadia vision, I think is a tremendous partnership. And the thing is, folks, understand that partnerships require a level of trust aligned with mutual interests, and I think they're there. And it's really, again, just how bold do we want to be, and how do we make sure that we take care of a lot of the interests and concerns that we have on the ground, whether stops or how we maintain certain quality of life. Like, those are really important questions. That table of trust and common interest allows for some pretty hard conversations that will need to take place.
I think what I would offer to this, I really appreciate the question. I think having leaders in this conversation that are kind of orienting the conversation around the outcomes we want versus the outcomes we don't want. I think a lot of times, in the world of housing development, so often what we hear is like, oh, well, we want housing, but we don't want this, or we want this, but we really don't want that. And so and I think the more that, whether they're cities or states, like at whatever level we're talking, I think the more that the conversation can be oriented around, these are the things that we want. It's enhancing community. It's preserving the natural, beauty that we have. It's all like, those are the things that we want. And let's have the conversation on those lines rather than what we don't want.
And if I may, I'll add one small component to that. The things that we say we want, how do we make those the easiest things to achieve? Because there's a lot of conversation around affordable housing and just housing in general, and yet we've continually, as a society and as a profession, made it more challenging. So how do we look at those needs and what we say we want and be able to make that the easiest thing possible to move forward? So we have a few more minutes, and so I'll kind of throw out the final question to you all, and that is just any final thoughts in your particular area of expertise where you feel like you want to impart a message and leave as a takeaway for this audience.
I'll start. There's an initiative that my organization we hope to launch in the fall, and obviously our geographic territory is, again, Snohomish, King, and Pierce, and it's centered around, I'm not a marketer per se, but it's around job hubs and asking ourselves, how do we have a much more distributed model of jobs and employment across our region? on one hand, the last 20, 30 years have been an amazing success, especially on the tech side, in Seattle and Bellevue and Redmond, going east to west on I-90. For better or for worse, a lot of that growth on the tech side in particular has been focused on that corridor. And so the question that I've asked of myself and my team is, how do we start looking up and down I-5 in that corridor? Traditional job centers like Everett and Renton and Tacoma. How do we ensure and try to drive more investment that fit the community needs and desires, and meet the interests of the talent and the people in those communities? How do we do that? And when I think about the possibility of high-speed rail, and I think about, cities like Bellingham and all points in between, like what does a distributed employment centers look like that fit your interests, your needs, and your strengths as a community, that preserves the things that you all care about? And how do we look at that much more distributive model of equitable growth, across the region? We get the housing that we need, we get the jobs that we want, they're good paying, to really support our communities, the livable communities, all those things. Like, as we build this out, that's the type of thinking I hope that we make sure included, and I hope that I can help out in any way I possibly can. Think about how we think about our economy that way.
Thank you. Amy?
I would leave the group with my expression of gratitude for having events like this, for being on the forefront of asking us to come here and join you in this conversation and learn from you and listen to what you're visioning for your community. Keep it up. And as we look towards the next meeting of the Cascadia Innovation Corridor, Governor Gregoire mentioned that November 15th symposium. That will be a big moment for us, specifically on the high-speed rail project, because by then, that day, November 15th, that is the 2-year anniversary of the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And it is that act paired with our Moving Washington Act, where the state legislature provided $150 million as match to go after that new federal high-speed rail money. And so by that 2-year anniversary, we hopefully will have heard from US DOT on how much we're winning in each of those 3 applications. So it's likely to be a celebratory event, and it will just launch us on the next round of engagement. So thank you for all the engagement to date, and keep it up. We're gonna need to continue to hear from you and put your vision at the forefront of what we're going after.
Totally echo the gratitude. I think what I would say in closing is the growth is coming, right? Like we know that we have a lot more people coming to this region over the next generation, and we can choose to be reactive and defensive about that, and it'll still happen, or we can use this as a catalyst to think big and really create the region that we want. And so it's super inspiring to be part of a gathering like this, and I hope there are a lot more like it. And I hope we can, as a region, think big. So thank you.
If you all would join me in thanking our panelists. I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
All right, folks, we're getting close. Thank you all. We're getting close. We just want to ask you to stick around a little bit and offer some feedback. We're going to have table captains. You're helping us out a lot. As we indicated at the beginning, this is the first of what might be a thing as it relates to other sort of subregions having this kind of event and offering feedback as we try to organize all of this complexity into something that takes us forward. So, Joe, if you'd like to just give a few instructions around the table captain.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you everybody for being here today. I've gotten questions about the restroom too. Just so you know, the restroom is outside, so you get some sunshine if you need to use the restroom during this conversation. That's where you go. If you're a table captain, please raise your hand. All right, we got a handful of folks. So as the mayor said, this is an event that is hoping to be replicated throughout the region. So we have table captains that are going to help lead discussions. They're going to get in different tables to take a few notes on themes that can be shared for future events and just to kind of get a sense of where our community is thinking. What I ask of you is if you are seated next to someone that you work regularly with or you have a great relationship with, feel free to jump to a different table. What we really want is a diversity of opinion and perspectives at different tables as part of this. And so our table captains have a few questions, but really this is an open-ended conversation and we welcome your feedback. So thank you all. Let's get going.
Thank you all for being here today. This has been really great. You, of course, can continue the conversation, but we're officially wrapping it up right now. The next event is the Waterfront Walking Tour. Andrea, my understanding is we're going to go over pretty much now for people who you probably need to get over there because some people from ULI Seattle, I think, are going to be there. Meeting on Laurel Street at the entrance to the Container Village. You know where that arc is? That's sort of where people are going to go who are participating in the Waterfront Tour. And then, of course, the walking tour is going to make their way to Culshan Trackside, where there'll be a social hour. And I said earlier, I think starting at 4. It's starting at 4:30, but if people arrive early, wow, you know, that's permissible. So I just want to thank everyone for spending 2.5 hours of your precious time on one of the last days of summer with us today. This is enormously helpful. You'll be hearing from us again, and I just want to thank all of you for your participation. Thanks so much.